Welcome to the Reclaim Project, your gateway to exploring the power of resilience, elevation and growth, and redefining what it means to stand in your truth. We share stories of strength and transformation, which we hope will inspire you to reclaim what has always been yours. In this episode, we explore the world of equine assisted therapy with Felicity Rideout. Felicity is the principal and founder of the Equine Assisted Wellbeing Institute, specializing in the training and certification of equine assisted therapy practitioners. With a background in psychology and postgraduate studies in educational neuroscience, Felicity brings a deep understanding of neurodiversity, trauma, and the horse-human connection. A self-confessed horse-mad girl in her youth, she credits her horses with providing purpose, belonging, and connection during life's toughest moments. So settle in for an informative chat about this fascinating modality.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Like I said to you before, I've wanted to set this up for quite some time, so it's really good to finally have you in the studio to talk about something that I've been excited about, because me, like most people, I love learning about new things, especially when it gets down to something that helps us as humans bring us back to who we really are. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Sean. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and I love talking about horses and all that sort of brings me joy, and how it helps other people too. It's really exciting to see how it can change people's lives and the benefits that it's having. So yeah, thank you.
So let's talk about let's start there. So you're the principal and founder of Equine Assisted Wellbeing Institute.
Yes.
Okay. What is it? Mm-hmm. For the benefit of those who don't know, such as myself, what exactly is it and what drew you to it?
Yeah, that's a really good place to start. Equine Assisted Wellbeing essentially is a type of equine assisted therapy, and you may not have heard of that either. A lot of people haven't. And essentially it's about utilising horses in a therapeutic space. And it doesn't have to be, sort of have any sort of look. It's very versatile, and there are many different sort of modalities, and we see people that are using it with psychotherapy, and then we have equine assisted learning. Right. And and then for us with the equine assisted wellbeing, so it's all about incorporating horses into a therapeutic setting. I have a background in psychology and worked with at-risk youth, and horses have always been part of my life. And what they did for me throughout my childhood. I was a very anxious child. When my parents divorced, I spent a lot of time alone and very, very fearful. I think knowing what I know now, I probably would have been diagnosed with OCD, and I had undiagnosed ADHD and autism and 2 learning disorders. So I had a bit of stuff going on that made childhood challenging. And having my pony and my horse, it gave me a space that I always felt that I belonged, and I always felt connected, and it just gave me unprecedented joy. And so, bringing the two together as an adult to give back to people was a no-brainer, and the opportunity to do that just really excited me. So
that's
off I went.
Fascinating. Now, I'm an animal person.
Yes.
I don't know a lot about horses, to be fair.
Mm-hmm.
The last time I actually rode a horse was probably about 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. To be fair, he was a very patient stallion, but he wasn't happy with me. So I was, it was very much amateur hour for him, but he stuck with me. But like I said, I'm an animal person, and I know how they make us feel. Is there anything unique about horses or different about horses in the way we interact with them, or vice versa, that is more suited to or more conducive to therapy?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. Dogs have their uses in therapy and obviously as assistance animals. And horses and dogs do have some similarities in that sense. But one of the unique things about horses is that they are a prey animal. So where dogs are predatory, horses are a prey animal. And so they are highly, highly sensitive and highly attuned to their environment. And of course, when we're with them, we are part of that environment.
Right.
And so, in addition, of course, to the fact that they're very big, most of them, which can be quite intimidating for people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so it sort of gives them this, this sort of they hold this presence. They've got a very large heart as well. And there are some studies that talk about their electromagnetic field that their heart gives off. And all part of that is about their nervous system and how it's regulating and how it's basically attuned for survival. They're mammals like we are, and they're highly social. And so that's one of the things that for us as a mammalian species and needing that social connection, it's such a beautiful pairing for the therapeutic environment.
See, that's very interesting that you say they're social, because my perception was completely, because of the little that I know about horses, I always consider them to be quite aloof and kind of standoffish. And so that's interesting you say that. That's
It is. And maybe one of the reasons for that is, Sean, is that a lot of times horses are kept in isolation.
Yes.
So they're in paddocks by themselves, especially if they're race horses or if they're competitive show horses. And I was one of those people that had my prized show horse in a paddock by himself, because even as a horse person, having ridden all my life, I didn't know that was actually not a good thing to doing. And I was creating, trauma like this. Absolutely. It's like being putting in an isolated cell, it was not good. And so we see a lot of horses experience trauma. And so one of those, aspects of that is that as humans, we've all experienced trauma as well. And so I find that people can really relate well to horses when they start to understand the natural way of the horse, and then what the environment and what certain conditions have, done to the horse, made the horse behave in certain ways. And it really helps us to learn about ourselves in a non-threatening way. So
what does a equine assisted therapy program or session look like? Let's start with a session, basically. An introductory session.
Yes.
Let's take me, for example.
Yes.
0% or 1%, knowledge about horses. How would you walk me through a session?
Yeah. And that's great, because most people that come for sessions know nothing about horses, which is really, really beautiful, because it's sort of a clean slate. And so there's this real sort of naivety about it, which is lovely.
Yeah.
And so for somebody like yourself, do you have nerves around horses? Do you think that you would feel a bit intimidated by their size, or haven't had experienced any sort of traumatic?
I wouldn't say traumatic, but I would be nervous. And the size would play a big role in that.
And we find that with most people. And a lot of people have actually experienced some sort of trauma with horses, whether they went to a trail ride when they were 8 and got bucked off, or the horse bolted, or their mum's friend's horse bit them, So this is really common.
Yeah.
And of course, all of those behaviours are not due to the horses being nasty animals or, poorly trained, but usually because of the environment that they're in. And so, because of that, being kept in isolation, being ridden when they shouldn't be ridden, and their bodies are sore, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's often that will be present when someone comes for a first session. We like to start really, really slow, and it's just about getting to know the environment and getting to know our little herd.
Yeah.
And so it's all about an introduction. And so for somebody that was really terrified and didn't want to get out of the car, you don't have to get out of the car. A horse is therapeutic because it's a horse, not because you need to be riding the horse or holding it, with a halter and lead rope.
Yeah.
It's about the presence. And you can learn so much from a horse from, meters away watching them. So the beauty about the Equine Assisted Wellbeing sessions is it's just so individual for each client.
Right.
And then for each client, it can look different week to week, fortnight to fortnight, whenever they're coming, based on what their needs are, without any expectation. And I think that's really unusual, because in the workplace or at school, there's all these demands, there's all these goals, there's all these expectations.
Yeah.
But when we lift all of that off and we provide a space where however you're feeling, whatever's happening, you're accepted just as you are. Unconditional, radical acceptance in this moment, because that's what horses, they're in the moment. They have no ego, so they're not judging. They're just, responding. Then the way that people feel and respond to that is really profound.
I love that, because like you said, through any other system, like you brought up the schooling system, everything's very rigid and very, these strict parameters. But to have the flexibility and freedom around equine assisted therapy session is incredible. I'm just, how do you, if somebody is going through talk therapy as well, and they kind of, combining it with the equine assisted therapy, is that something that works really well, or you'd rather do one or the other?
Absolutely. Lots of people will be, going through talk therapy at the same time, or people have done talk therapy and found that it wasn't working for them, or they felt like they exhausted that avenue.
Yeah.
And then they start looking for other options. What else can I do, on their healing journey? With kids, a lot of kids struggle in that clinical, understandably. I mean, a lot of us adults do too, but in those traditional clinical settings. And so parents will bring their kids. But many people are doing those therapies hand in hand, and they complement each other beautifully because you're doing something experientially. You're putting it into practice. Say, for example, someone that has experienced trauma and they're struggling with connection. Well, you can talk about it till the cows come home. But unless you're actually able to put in practice those steps of building connection, nothing changes.
Yeah.
So, because, we sort of touched on this in our earlier conversation about understanding intellectually and analysing everything. Well, that only gets you so far. You can be an expert with head knowledge.
Yeah.
But being able to then put that into practice and build a connection with an animal, because, all trauma in some way is linked to another human. But when we, connect with an animal, it just takes away that element of threat. It's one of the reasons polyvagal theory, emphasises the importance and the role that animals play, especially mammals like dolphins and horses and dogs, in rebuilding that connection for people that have lost that.
Yeah. So obviously for trauma and trauma release, what else would be good for neurodivergent? So you have particular expertise in that. Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah.
And I think one of the things, with that is there was a book published probably about 20 years ago now called The Horse Boy, and a man called Rupert Isaacson, and he's from the United States, and his son's autistic and was nonverbal and went on this huge journey through Mongolia and riding horses, and the change that it brought about his son in being able to connect with the horse. And I think that was really sort of pivotal in seeing neurodivergent, especially autistic kids, start to utilise the therapeutic aspects of horses. When I first started out, though, because I studied psychology, didn't learn anything about autism at uni, and so I felt my understanding was very limited, and I said I will refer autistic clients on. It's not an area I feel comfortable with. My famous last words, because the nature of the work, they were just, banging on the door, and I couldn't really turn them away. So my choice then was I didn't have a choice. I had to get educated on the subject, and I had some incredible people help me with that. And then it sort of turned into this love affair with understanding the neurodivergent brain and how it benefits autistic kids and ADHD kids. And that sort of became really a large part of our work. And so now with the training that I do, it's heavily focused on understanding trauma and understanding neurodivergence, because sadly, it's an area that, whether it's the school system or the health system, it's greatly misunderstood. And what that misunderstanding does is it further contributes to the problems that are already there, and adds to things like, shame, which contributes to, poor mental health outcomes long term. So the use of it for neurodivergent individuals is huge and so beneficial.
Fantastic. Now, you mentioned a program. So you run a Equine Assisted Therapy program.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yes. So when I started out, I had my own therapy business, and it was thriving, doing really well. And I started to get asked by people, how can I do what you're doing? And I just didn't feel comfortable recommending any of the training programs that were on offer. And although I'm grateful for what I had learned, had I not had a psych degree and done extra studies on top, I would have really struggled, and I did struggle. There was sort of no support afterwards. There was no training on neurodivergence. There was no understanding around trauma. It was very basic, and I just didn't feel comfortable. And I thought, wow, I really have so much that I've learnt intellectually, but also experientially. I've got something to offer here.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of how the Institute came about, and that is now that's just what I do. Is I don't actually do the one-to-one therapy sessions anymore. It's all about this training program, and so I started with in-person trainings in Perth, and now we've put it online. So there's a full online certification course, and we've got students internationally. I just talked to a woman in Kenya yesterday who's just graduated, and so that's really exciting.
Are there prerequisites? Like, do you have to have a psych background or any sort of...
No prerequisites. Wow. And look, while I have so many of the people that have come through have, we've got psychologists and counsellors and social workers, OTs, speechies, and that's beautiful. They're sort of already in that helping profession, and they own horses and they want to get outside of the clinic. But what can't be undervalued is life experience. People that have really lived and gone through their own journey. And for them to then, and the role that horses have played in their life, and then they want to give back, there's so much in that. And so for me, I'm always really, encouraging those people to do it, because, you don't need to have a degree. There's, degrees don't make a difference. People who care do. And I think we can really get stuck looking at, I don't know about you, but Sean, but I've sat in many professionals' offices that have lots of certificates on the wall and have walked out feeling worse than I did before. So while we have to give credit where credit's due, it's certainly not the be-all and end-all. No,
it's not. And look, we mentioned talk therapy working for some people, not for others. Certainly, in my experiences, certainly for guys, I wouldn't say it's not effective. Like, it has its place, absolutely, but guys don't generally do well with talk therapy, especially talk therapy only, mainly because it's so difficult for guys to open up to anyone, let alone a stranger.
Yep.
That's why modalities such as your breath work and cold water therapy or guys are so drawn to that, because
and they're somatic.
They're somatic. Absolutely.
They're connecting us back to the body, and they're grounding us. And because the risk is when we're just talking about stuff, that's ungrounding us, really, if we're not, equally putting that attention back and awareness into the body, and because trauma is held in the body, and so it can take us further away. It can almost be an avoidance of what's actually going on, and I think that's a huge sort of a fault, for use of a better word, with just a blanket approach with talk therapy. And then, like you say, it has its place, but it's certainly not the be-all and end-all. And I think nowadays more and more people are expanding themselves to try different things.
Absolutely, there's a massive shift happening. So which is positive.
It is, isn't it? And there's science to back it up, which I love.
So on that. So this is evidence-based, the equine assisted therapy.
The equine assisted therapy is something that's a little bit harder to get a lot of concrete sort of evidence on, but we're getting more and more research, is happening in the field. And I think, with my psych background, I was really sort of challenged by someone a few years ago who said to me, with your psychology, you need to be careful because you can get stuck in that sort of analysing everything. And I got quite defensive at the time, but the comment that this woman made, it actually changed sort of the trajectory for me, and it really opened me up to then exploring neuroscience. And, a lot of what neuroscience is promoting and advocates and has evidence for are these traditional, practices like dance and breath work and, cold therapy, nature, being with horses. And, this is stuff it's so simple, and it's been utilised, by communities and tribes for thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
But what I think happens is with some of these therapies is that they seem too simple. The simplicity is almost overwhelming, that people think that it can't really benefit them.
So true.
Because we're so stuck in problem solving.
So true. Yeah. And that, we do. We get stuck in it. We get so tunnel visioned, and we try and compute our way out of every single situation. And like we said in our previous conversation, we just exhaust ourselves. So this is a really nice balance between evidence-based therapy and intuitive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, lovely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, with the people that come and do the training through the Institute, some have that more scientific background and others have a more holistic, whether they've studied Reiki or some of those sort of energy healing. And so I think it lends itself to the practitioner. Like I say to the people that do the training, that it's about, I give them the tools, like my roadmap that I, saw me build a successful business and saw it make a positive impact in people's lives. But what it comes down to is harnessing the magic of the individual practitioner, their, unique story. What makes them unique is, there's only one of them. And so, it's letting go of the idea of any competition or imposter syndrome, and it's bringing your magic to the table. No one else can offer that. How cool. And then, when you tap into that and let go of all the other stuff, that's when I think you can really be most effective.
So let's, something just came to mind. We put myself as an example in this scenario. Like I'm a newcomer to this therapy. What if it's the other way around? I'm comfortable enough to approach a horse, but the horse isn't receptive. Like the horse, because they are animals are very perceptive. So wouldn't that be then really off-putting for me, or even traumatic? Like, okay, something's really wrong with me if this horse doesn't want to interact.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's a good one because, people often say that horses are mirrors, which is an interesting sort of statement. But, what that means is they offer us opportunity to look inward.
Yeah.
And because, and I feel that with myself too. If I go to put the halter on my horse because I want to take her for a walk up the road and she walks away from me, I feel a little bit rejected, you know? And so they offer us this opportunity, whereas some people, if we're not able to do that, will become defensive and, say things like, oh, she's being naughty, she's a rude horse or worse, Yeah. And so, but because we're working with clients that aren't horse people, so they're not sort of programmed to, treat horses or view horses in a traditional sense, which is a good thing, they're sort of more open and often they get a bit confused.
Okay.
Yeah, so if the horse walks away. So what that does is it allows for opportunity for just curiosity.
Okay.
For about what's happening and observation. And I don't know about you, but one of the things that I'm still learning to do is witness my own mind. It's having that detachment from what's, the noise and stepping outside. And so, when a horse, for example, you go to approach it and it walks away. And when we're with a client, if you were standing with me and we're outside of the paddock or we've just walked into the paddock, we get to pause and look at what's happening. And because I'm there as the leader, you don't really know what's going on. So you will naturally sort of look to me for guidance and trust whatever I'm sort of saying and pointing out, and together we'll observe the situation. And so what that does is we're not sucked into a story about why the horse has walked away. We're just witnessing what's happening. And so, again, it comes back to that sort of experiential practice that where else do you get to put that into practice if you're not in an environment or around people that support that?
Yeah, and that's a really, really good, I suppose, analogy to life in general, is just observe rather than get caught up in the why as has happened and then,
Yep.
You said there are no prerequisites to do this program. Are there any personal qualities, or is it a one-size-fits-all, just anyone can do it? Yeah.
I mean, I think people that are interested in that want to do the training, they're already halfway there. Like if you've experienced with horses, you have to know the benefit the horses bring to your life, what their presence can do for you. Yeah. Otherwise, you wouldn't be interested in doing it. So that's, it's knowing that value.
True.
I think is a big thing. And, I guess it's not such a prerequisite, but it's what I see draws people to the training. And are people that have gone through hardships And often people that have worked or either worked in sort of more traditional clinical settings or been on the receiving end of that clinical sort of treatment or therapeutic models, and they feel that they're sort of not working, they're not as effective as they could be.
Right.
And that's sort of, what I see in people. But, for the training is it's not traditional in the sense that I didn't want to be teaching people a whole lot of information that then they just have to remember and recite back to, tick off some boxes. For me, it was really important, and especially having learning disorders and struggling through university, I really wanted to make it a personal sort of twist on it, I guess. So there's a lot of reflection. So they learn and they watch videos if they're doing on the online training, but there's a lot of self-reflection, and that goes back to things like understanding behaviour, reflecting on their own childhood, the way they were parented, their views about, autistic kids and different behaviours they might have witnessed, horse behaviour trauma. So there's a lot of self-reflection. Yeah. And for me, that's really, really important because I guess, looking at prerequisites, it's having a certain level of self-awareness.
Yeah.
Because I think without that, you can't be effective in anything that you do.
Correct, yeah. And is it, obviously it'll be more effective as a one-on-one sort of therapy, but can you hold group sessions or small groups?
Yeah, I think that's the beautiful thing about it. There's so much that you can do with it.
Yeah.
And workshops, I've done, group workshops, and they are different. The one-on-ones are really effective, but then the group settings offer a different dynamic, because you can sort of, the energies play off each other from the other people and the horses and what that sort of can tell you. But also for groups, if you have groups from a workplace and they're working together, and then you put that dynamic into, with the herd of horses, like can be really good for,
interesting.
Putting a new take on team building.
That's very interesting.
Yes,
okay,
yes. Yeah. So there's lots that can be done with it. I know a group over east, and they go into prisons and they take the horses there with their removable round yard and do that. So pairing with yoga retreats, sort of that real holistic wellness for women, mothers and daughters, relationship building, communication. There's just the opportunities are endless.
Gosh,
I wish that there was more of me so I could do all of these things, but I can't.
Well,
I can sort of,
Well, that's what you're heading towards,
yes,
right?
exactly.
Like coaching more or teaching more people. But that team building is a very interesting one. I never considered that because, your normal team building day is, rock climbing or sort of problem solving, and
exactly.
It's fun for a day, but then,
put them in with some horses and
wow.
I think that would really challenge, especially the big egos.
So team leaders take note.
And also with PTSD, I think in the States it's utilised a lot over there for military vets, and we're in conversations with a group in the UK called Equistrong UK. And that's a charitable organisation that are set up basically to work with first responders and military veterans, and they want to do the training. They want to incorporate that sort of deeper understanding of trauma and neurodivergence into what they do, so that they can have that real positive impact with their clients.
Yeah. Do you know, PTSD, that's why I was very interested when you refer to autism, especially nonverbal, because especially in my case, when I was diagnosed, it was almost like that, where I felt nonverbal in terms of as much as I wanted to communicate what was going on, I really couldn't. I was like stuck. So there's a huge element of trust and allowing yourself to be vulnerable. So I can actually see myself in an equine assisted therapy session and just allowing myself, just entrust myself to this animal, I could absolutely see that, because that really is a huge issue with PTSD. I wouldn't say sufferers, or those experiencing PTSD.
Yes. Do you think, when you sort of picture that, do you think trusting and opening yourself up, being vulnerable to an animal, the idea of that feels safer than to a human?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yep.
100%. I can only talk in terms of my dog or my dogs.
Yeah.
There's a certain language. It's a spiritual language. It really is. It's you just get it.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they're so real. They're only ever in the present moment. And most of us, most of the time, are in our heads.
Yeah.
And, they really do bring us back to what's real.
Exactly.
Which is so beautiful.
It really, it's real. It's authentic.
Yes.
And it's absolutely beautiful. And I find the same with just being in nature as well. It took me a while to get to that point. Because, yes, I would venture out in nature because my therapist told me to do so in terms of practicing mindfulness. And, she kind of coached me how to do that, and it took me a while to break down the barriers to be able to do that. But when you really allow nature to speak to you, it's very, very powerful.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
It's incredibly powerful, yeah.
And you had to slow down to appreciate it, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's why I think the horses works, horses, obviously you're in nature with the horses, but it works well because they sort of force you to slow down when you're with them, as opposed to just, I think if you first start putting that in practice for some people being in nature, they sort of don't know what to do because we're always doing. And it's like, oh, how do I just be in nature?
Yes.
I need to do, and my brain needs something, which can feel overwhelming.
I could relate to that. Yeah. That was me in the initial stages. Like, wow, okay,
what
cool.
do I do? This is
great.
Do I do?
Am
I better now?
Yeah.
There's so much to unpack. I think on the surface it seems with all of those sort of modalities that they're very simple, but when you start to peel back the layers of what they offer each person, and it varies from person to person, that what you will get out of it, but there's so much to it, it is actually really complex.
Is it at the point now where I know that you mentioned the US before, is it at the point in Australia where it's recognised as an adjunct to mainstream kind of, no, okay.
It's not, and one of the reasons for that is it's not a regulated industry. There are certainly a lot of positive things about the fact that it's not a regulated industry. Yeah. Because as soon as things are regulated, there's a whole lot of red tape, and it really does limit what you can do. And, I think so for this type of therapy, the onus is on the consumer to do their research, because essentially anybody could start up an equine assisted therapy business.
Right.
Anybody, and call themselves an equine assisted therapist, which is like, anything like breath work, sound. People can even say that with counselling, although they can't register, obviously, with the governing bodies, but people can call themselves with yoga. So it's up to the consumer to do their research and see where they've had their training, what experience do they have, read reviews, etc. And then I feel like the onus is also on us as practitioners. That's why it was so important for me, especially as a mum of neurodivergent kids, to really be setting a high standard of what's offered, so that, a good quality service exists and that people really can, get what they need rather than, a cowboy. Because so much damage can be done.
Absolutely.
When we're in the wrong hands.
Correct.
It's just one of those things.
So there's no accreditation with any particular governing body. Is there some sort of certification?
Well, that's what I offer.
Because
it's
people
yes.
we love our certificates.
We love our
our paperwork.
We love our paperwork. I know, right? Exactly. Yeah. So that's what, when people study with the Institute, they receive a certification as an endorsed practitioner in equine assisted wellbeing, and they're placed on a database where people can access, find, practitioners where they exist.
Yeah.
And then they're, part of a group where they, we have a really beautiful community, so supportive, sharing ideas and resources, and using the logo so that, people have to meet certain standards to be able to use that in terms of their welfare for their horses. That's a huge part of, what our values as well, just to try and keep some sort of, standard. Yeah. But that's, for the Institute and what I, head up and run.
I mean, it's certainly you want to align yourself with the right practitioners, because you're entrusting it's your life basically.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's your well-being.
Absolutely. And as a mum who's seen her kids, experience trauma at the hands of therapists and school teachers, people that mean well, but unfortunately are just misinformed. For me, it's really important to drive home some of those things. And I think that's with the training, like having that aspect of reflection and really getting people to question themselves and their own beliefs. And all of the feedback that I get is really positive around that. People have really sort of enjoyed and found it challenging, but really insightful. And for me, that's true learning. Like, that's really what you take away. You may forget some facts, but that stuff is real change.
Yeah, So your psych background, and you mentioned your neuroscience as well.
Yes.
So does that influence your?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, 100%. Yeah, and especially more so now with the neuroscience stuff, because it really pairs so well with, being the somatic, what we understand about those somatic practices and how that benefits people. It pairs beautifully, and I feel like it's really just helped me to package up something that's really beneficial and really effective, and people seem to really enjoy learning. But then, hearing the stories of the families that people are working with and how it's benefiting them is just beautiful, from kids that are neurodivergent and struggle with emotional regulation, which is a big one, and regularly seeing their practitioner and, having that connection with the horse, and how being grounded and being in nature and building that connection, being in an environment where they don't have to sit still, they're free to move as they need to, and how that actually impacts the whole family. Like the child goes home and the parents are like, my kid's so, content and regulated, and, so it's really rewarding.
Is there a danger in bringing your kid home and the kid demanding a pony?
Yes, huge danger in that. Warning. Yes,
warning.
Absolutely. And I do feel for those parents. But I think for them it's so good, because they sort of feel like their child is getting the best of, being with horses, and they're not having to look after them. So it's sort of the best of both worlds. It's a common thing, actually. There has been some quite well known that with autistic females that a special interest is often horses. So with boys we have, it's sort of stereotypical trains, and my son was the trains obsessed 2-year-old. Whereas with girls, knowing everything about horses, every breed, every colour, that full total knowledge and sort of obsessiveness. And over the years, we've seen quite a few autistic girls who present like that. And then when I do the training, of course, to these horsewomen, it's really interesting for them to reflect on themselves and start to see some patterns through their own lives and with their own kids, which is, really insightful.
So apart from I know you don't do one-on-one anymore, you just run the program. But when you did you run retreats as well, or is that available?
I didn't do retreats. I was just sort of working with mainly with neurodivergent kids and trauma in late teens and young adults. But no, some of my clients are planning to run retreats. Actually, a woman on the East Coast is going to be setting up a place for, a bit like we spoke about before, for businesses, for team building, and for really that real respite. So because you're in nature, it's a beautiful setting, and then incorporating, the breath work, sound bowls.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Very, very powerful.
Yes. And there's just so much. There's so much to unpack. I think on the surface it seems with all of those sort of modalities that they're very simple, but when you start to peel back the layers of what they offer each person, and it varies from person to person, that what you will get out of it. But there's so much to it, it is actually really complex. Yeah.
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
For me, so absolutely the psychological breakthrough for me was a process called EMDR.
Yeah.
It was brutal.
Yes.
But very effective.
Yeah.
Very, very effective. And it took quite a bit of time because I had complex PTSD, so a lot of triggers and a lot of events to revisit. But like you said, the body still keeps the score. So I still, once the psychological stuff had been dealt with and not having that emotional response to the memories, I still had stuff stored in my body that talk therapy couldn't cover or wouldn't reach.
No.
But something as simple yet complex as this. That's the way to go, like with the cold therapies and all that kind of stuff. It sounds so simple, but it's so damn powerful.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep. And you need to rewire, like if you've lost trust, then you need to relay down those networks, those pathways again. Yeah.
So feeling safe was a big thing for me. I couldn't I wouldn't allow myself to feel safe because I was so used to being on high alert and sort of emergency mode and that kind of stuff and being hyper vigilant.
Yes.
So to feel safe was actually a very foreign feeling.
Yeah.
I was very uncomfortable feeling safe.
Yeah. So you were never relaxed then?
No. And I didn't realise it at the time, obviously, because that's...
Normal became your normal.
So, feeling safe was kind of unsettling. And you almost, when you start feeling safe, you almost go searching for the...
Yes.
You do catch yourself and like, whoa,
this is not
hang
okay.
on a second, this is a bit too comfortable here.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's why I asked about whether... when horses kind of quote unquote reject your approach, because I can imagine that happening with all the stuff I was carrying.
Yeah,
I would bring that to the horse, and the horse would sense that and like, hang on a second,
maybe. Yeah, some horses would. Some horses might feel that. And back away. Some horses might be curious. Just like humans, it's going to depend on their individual, what traumas they've experienced, their breed, their age.
Oh, their breed, okay.
Their other horses in the paddock, the person that you're with and the relationship that person has. There's so many variables, and that will change moment to moment, just like it does with us humans, which is so beautiful because when you have that scenario and then you have, a practitioner who's sort of set back and observing the situation, it stops you from getting stuck in any story, like laying that down to them rejecting you because you just don't get a chance because you have to be present there with them and it's always changing. And then you play with it. So say if a horse does step away, what we like to do is like play with the bubble. So we'll see how close we can get when because the horse will say like no, and our horses can say no. So if they don't want to play today, that's okay, because we're big about consent. So we can't advocate for our clients to have consent and then say no, the horse doesn't get any. We're just going to use it. Like that just does not align with my values at all. So the horse gets a choice, but that's so empowering because we want to advocate for people to have boundaries and to be able to say no.
Sure.
And so when we allow, and a lot of people struggle with that, and I still do at times.
Yep.
But when we can actually putting that into practice experientially in a safe way with an animal, even though it still can be scary, it's nothing really compared to a human. They're getting to practice it, and then we're getting to understand that it's nothing's ever personal,
Just that, taking it on board as a personal kind of rejection or...
Totally, which we're sort of programmed to do that, right? To keep us safe.
To keep us safe, absolutely.
But then we get to experience it and nothing bad happens. Like we get to sit with that, like we'll just sit here on the bubble of where it's okay, and some days it might be, yes, they want to come in and play and other times they don't. And then we get to have a look at, like interoceptive awareness is something that a lot of people struggle with, knowing what's happening internally. But to be able to communicate with horses, we need to have, really good sense of what's happening inside of us. So we get to be still and feel that and experience that. And again, it's non-threatening because I'm not, we're not asking you, what happened on this day and talk about your feelings. There's no pressure. It's just, we're just there together in the moment with the horse, sharing the experience together. Yeah.
See, that's the bit I love. It's so easy to fall into that negative self-talk sort of pattern of like, wow, okay, we look for that confirmation bias. Like, okay, I know my self-worth is low, but now, I'm being rejected by this horse, so that proves that I'm, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. And so, there are opportunities where that will happen and then all of a sudden it changes, and so we just get to see that horse just being their complete natural self and all of the different reasons of why they can be doing what they're doing. Yeah. But because you can't get stuck thinking about it because you might get your foot trodden on or you might get kicked. Yeah. So it takes you out of your analytical head that's thinking about, don't they like me? Or, stops that dead in its tracks because you have to be present.
I love that.
And so, like with meditation, people can find that difficult because they're trying to stop thinking and they get in their heads where they're trying to meditate. Whereas this is meditative. be mindful, because you have to be present.
Yeah.
And that's and people do get their foot trodden on, and people get little nips, and sometimes a horse will say, you're not, I need you to regulate, because if you're dysregulated, you're actually a threat, because for the herd, you're signalling that there's danger.
Yeah.
The horse can smell your cortisol. And so,
makes perfect sense. Yep. Makes perfect sense.
Come back here. They're saying ground yourself,
Yeah.
So it's beautiful, and the way people respond to it is really amazing, considering what people have been through.
Yeah.
But I think when you can hold that space and sort of make light of it, don't take it too seriously, it makes it fun.
And, you said an interesting thing about meditation before, because a lot of people sort of try it a few times and they get disheartened because they can't do it. And it does take a bit of doing to get your mind still, because even guided meditation, sometimes you try and force thoughts in and out, in or out, or try and force a state of thoughtlessness. You can't force it, but to have a situation such as a horse around you that kind of, I wouldn't say force, but it encourages it. Well, you have to be present, like you said.
Yes,
yeah, you have to be.
So, a little reality check.
Yeah, because, with meditation, in the initial stages, it's so easy to drift. Even not the initial stages, even no matter how advanced you are, depending on what's happening for you in that particular moment or season or whatever, you can still drift.
Totally. And like I say, what you resist persists. And the minute we resist trying to think, we can go and get stuck, rather than just relaxing and watching our thoughts,
Yeah.
But it's a practice. But my teacher says that whenever you're present to reality, that is being in a meditative state. He talks about driving motorcycles at really high speed, because if you're not,
Wow, I hadn't thought of. Yeah.
If you're not present to reality, then
that makes
it's very dangerous.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And in that moment, going super, super fast, you're just
you're
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, because it just helps expand the mind about what that state really is, of being in that meditative state, or being in that state of no mind, completely relaxed. What is that? What does that look like? Rather than trying to force it to happen, because then we're sort of inadvertently doing the opposite of what we're aiming to do.
Yeah. So let's say I'm interested in doing a course. What am I in for? How long will it be, and what will I be learning?
Yes. So most of the training's done online now. Basically, it takes sort of 10 to 12 weeks, but there's 12 months to complete, which is wonderful, because there's sort of no pressure. And there's 10 modules. So they're video lessons with me speaking, and each module has anywhere between 2 to 4 lessons in it. All come with their own downloadable handbook. And throughout the course, students they don't have to, but they're encouraged to do 1 or 2 Zooms with myself, just as whether it's just a casual chat or they have questions, and most of them do have questions just about, what's sort of going on in the course. Each lesson also has multiple choice questions they have to answer, and anywhere between 2 to 4 personal reflective questions that are long answers. And for me, it's not about looking at any sort of spelling or sentence structure or grammar. If people want to voice record it, they can. Okay. But it's really about me, gaining an understanding that they have opened themselves up, and that they're taking a look at everything sort of from a wider and deeper perspective.
Right.
And then, we cover business and marketing in that as well. So the last 2 modules.
Right.
Because that's what I found. I'd never owned my own business before. I finished doing my training, wanted to start my business, and you have to become an expert in social media and website design, and it's a whole nother. And a lot of people struggle with that. Especially women. A lot of women are in their 50s. They've exhausted their career. Kids are a bit more independent. They want to give back, do the training, and now they feel overwhelmed. So for me, it's really important for giving them those tools so that they can put the what they've learned into practice. That's the whole idea.
Yeah.
And then that support from me is ongoing.
That's really fantastic. Yeah.
So email support and phone call support. The woman I had a phone call with yesterday in Kenya, she has a client who had been through some trauma, and she just wanted to sort of chat about the way she was going to approach the session. So we did a quick Zoom. And for me, that's really important. So it's being that mentor and being available to my students, and that's my whole focus now is about doing that, so that they feel confident to do it.
Obviously, it's impossible with your overseas clients, but I take it there's no hands-on practical component.
Not with the online. They're encouraged to do exercises themselves with their own horses, and most people have their own horses. Yep. Although I have had a few, one woman just recently graduated, she's in Queensland, and she hasn't had horses for years and years and years. She's just finished her Masters in Social Work. And so she has organised with the local riding school to run therapy sessions with the riding school horses, and then the riding school owner will get a small cut of those, of the fees. And so prior to that, when she was doing the training, my training, online training, she was going to the riding school and volunteering to get some hands-on groundwork experience with horses that she hadn't had for so long, and practice what she was learning from me. And I think that's a wonderful example of making it work when you don't have your own property and your own horses. Yeah. And it's win-win for everybody. It offers another service. It's not in competition with the riding school, but it's utilising,
Yeah, that's really good tip, actually, because a lot of people would be interested in thinking, well, there's this barrier, I don't have access.
Yeah,
but you do, through those avenues, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah,
wow.
And you don't need to, like me personally, we don't promote, riding per se. If people want to learn to ride, then go to a riding school. And many different of the practitioners will incorporate riding to lesser and greater degrees. But you don't need to have been an expert horse rider. You just need to be competent on the ground handling horses and understanding horse behaviour. But we do cover that in the training, and then I recommend for people that feel weak in that area, specific people to learn from, and online training that they can do just to strengthen in that space. So you don't have to have been this, fantastic horse rider to, utilise and promote this therapy, which is really good.
Yeah, well, that's good news for me. I still feel sorry for that horse. Oh my gosh! But like I said, he was very patient. He was very good. But it's so funny. As soon as I sat on his back, you could tell, okay, this guy has no idea, and his ears were doing these ones, and he just wasn't pleased.
He wasn't pleased.
No, and it was a long day for him, and then I come along.
Yeah, and this is what we see in horses at riding schools.
Yeah.
A lot of horses like that, and people often say, oh, they're so quiet, they're bomb-proof, what wonderful horses. But a lot of those horses are actually suffering from something called learned helplessness, which, we see in humans as well. And it's the giving up response. It's like if you had a dog in a cage and then you opened the cage door for it to be free, and it's like it doesn't see that the cage door's open. It just, that is its reality. And we see this in horses a lot because they're not predatory. So yes, they will kick and bite, but it's more of a default for them to go into that shutdown response, basically. Yeah. And so they're mistaken for the perfect
Whereas they
horse.
Could be quite depressed.
Yes, often. And it's very, very common. Yes. I know.
Yeah.
From being a competitive dressage rider.
I didn't know that about you. Wow.
Yes, so I was very, very serious, with riding and competing, and the way that I rode and looked after my horses is very different to what I do now. And so for me, there's been this huge unlearning, and then, adopting new, even just having a horse in captivity, in a paddock, even if the paddock's big, we've already disabled them because, their natural way to escape a threat is to flee. And the minute there's a fence there, and they know, no matter how far away, that there's a fence there, that just puts them off, they're just disabled. We have interrupted their mechanism, and so we have to bear that in mind, that every interaction with the horse, they're not able to really be their authentic selves.
Correct.
Because they're in cap. And it is what it is. Horses have been in captivity, utilised by humans for a long time.
For a long time,
but, I think when we understand that, we understand their natural way of being in the world, it just enables us to do better. When you know better, you do better.
Yeah. As you were talking there, this image came to mind as, and I was travelling, I was on the west coast of the US, and I was going I think it was between California and Utah, or further even. But it was in Utah that I saw this, these horses just out in the wild, and it was so beautiful, just out on the plains. It was fantastic. It was such an incredible sight, just there would have been, I don't know, maybe 50 of them just running.
Wow. That's cool.
And it was, just the freedom
that
I could sense. I'm like, wow, yeah.
It's interesting because wild horses are often, surprisingly, and this goes for, I know quite a lot of people that have rescued brumbies from over east and the outbacks of WA and then brought them and domesticated them. And they're often wonderful riding horses. And there's this sense of sort of resiliency and confidence and curiosity that they have that domesticated horses often don't. And one of the reasons for that is because they grow up in the herd, they develop a secure attachment. Whereas horses that are domesticated, especially, race horses, competition horses, they're weaned very early, and it's a very traumatic process. And so we see these horses that are very fragile, and their behaviours can then, as they develop, really demonstrate that fragility and the fact that they have insecure attachments like humans do. So wild horses, it's so fascinating to watch them, and their energy is so different to most domesticated horses.
There's power.
There's power. There's a groundedness. There's this solid strength about them.
Yes.
Whereas horses in captivity, there's this uneasiness a lot of the time, and they're more flighty, not as settled.
Gosh, I've learned so much in this little hour that we talked. It was like, wow, and I could really talk to you for hours and hours. I feel like we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah, yep.
I will pop some links for people to get to get hold of you.
Yes, absolutely. If there's anyone that does this and that wants to do the training, they can offer them a special offer. More people that are offering alternatives to support people's mental health and well-being, the better. Like, the world needs more.
Honestly, and I'm like we mentioned before, I'm really pleased that we're at this point. Yeah, there's still a little way to go, but we're experiencing this shift where people are more open to alternative, what would previously been considered way too alternative, poo-pooed. It's now being more widely accepted, which is so good. And the simplicity of it.
Beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
Felicity, I can't thank you enough for your time. I've learned a hell of a lot, and I'm sure everyone listening has too. I know we're only scratching the surface with this, but I'm really thankful that you've come in and shared what you have today.
Thank you so much. It's been so lovely to talk about it and be on the show.
If you'd like to contact Felicity to learn more about Equine Assisted Therapy, details are listed in the description below. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your company next time.